And so today we're going to begin with just speaking to Omar Suleiman, who's the founder and president of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research and an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at Southern Methodist University. Reverend Jen Bailey, who's an ordained minister, public theologian, and a leader in the multi-faith movement for justice. She's the founding executive director of the Faith Matters Network. And Rabbi Sara Luria, who's the founder of Beloved, which is a home-based experiment on Jewish life in Brooklyn. And I want to start by asking each one of you, and maybe it works best if I just ask one of you to start. If you could offer a faith reflection from your tradition that's helped you get through this moment right now. And maybe, Jen, if you could start.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are finding yourself safe and grounded and in a place of at least restful pause in this season. Thank you so much, Sinat, for the question. I'm calling in from my home office in Nashville, Tennessee. And my community, in addition to facing some of the challenges that all of us are facing around coronavirus, about a month ago had a major tornado hit. And so we've been sort of wrestling with and sitting in the tension of how to care for and think about community in this moment where there's so many people who have material needs, but we can't quite physically be there with them. And so as I was thinking about my tradition, and as we approach, we are in the middle of the season of Lent in the Christian tradition, and we're about to hit up Holy Week, where we really are in a spirit of deep reflection. I've been thinking about those elements of my tradition that are most life-giving to me in this season of darkness. And I've been turning a lot to hymnody, so the hymns of the church. I see one of my mentors in ministry, Reverend Reggie Blunt, on the call. So I've been spending a lot of time. I'm a part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is a part of the Methodist family of churches. And one thing us Methodists are known for is that we're a singing people. So from the very beginning of our denominational traditions, hymns and singing has been a really strong source. So I whipped out my good AME hymnal this morning as I was preparing for this call, and flipped to a song that's been really holding me well in this season that simply is called Time is Filled with Swift Transition. And the first verse of the song, it was written in the turn of the 20th century by a woman who was physically disabled. And as I think about the ways in which women's leadership in my tradition has played such a central role, from the author of this hymn to the women who stood at the feet of the cross during the crucifixion moment on Easter Sunday. It's really been sitting with me. So I am not going to sing to you because I love you and want to spare you in this season. But I thought I would just read the first verse of the hymn, which simply says that time is filled with swift transition, not of earth unmoved can stand. Build your hopes on things eternal, hold to God's unchanging hand. So as you are entering into this season, and we are all in a season of deep uncertainty, remembering deeply that there are some things that are eternal. There are some things that we can lean on, whether it be our traditions or one another, that remain an expression of the divine's love for us. I invite you, maybe it's not formal hymnody that gives you life right now. I've also been getting a lot of life from 90s R&B lately, right? So those things that bring you joy, that joy is an emotion that ought to be felt in this season as well as countercultural. So that is my faith reflection to kick us off.
Okay, got it. Sheikh Omar, can I ask you to go next? And then after that, Rabbi Sara.
First of all, thank you for that. I'm looking very deeply. I mean, there's a passage in the Quran that frequently is cited, which is, with every hardship comes ease. And with every hardship comes ease. Verily, with every hardship comes ease. It's repeated twice. And one of the things that struck me about that verse a few years ago, I'd say probably 2 years ago, was when I started to consider that I've been reading the verse all of this time as after every hardship is ease, meaning as you're in the dark tunnel, you can see the light if you look close enough, and you need to ponder and reflect on, getting back to normalcy and what awaits you at the end of it all. But the verse does not say in the ba'd al-usri yusra, that after hardship comes ease. It says with every hardship comes ease. In the ma'd al-usri yusra. And there are two ways to understand that. One of them is that as hardship is decreed, the ease has already been decreed with it. And so there's a sense of certainty that ease will indeed come. So sort of serving the function of the first meaning, or the way that it's traditionally understood. Secondly, though, that if you ponder within hardship on the many ways that ease has also come with that hardship, you'll actually start to appreciate God's blessings in a much more holistic way. And so what is hardship for the human family is ease for the animal kingdom. You know, it's ease for the environment. That's one way of understanding it, right? So what is hardship for one set of people, or one set of God's creation, is ease for another set of God's creation. If you think about what this forces us to do in terms of reflection, there is ease in reflection. There is ease in rest. I was reflecting on this saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he said that there are two blessings that are frequently neglected, and that is health and free time. And one of the sages of Islamic history said that you rarely find that those two blessings are ever actually combined with a person. So usually you have an abundance of one when you have a decline of the other. And so when you lose your health, then you have a lot of free time. When you have a lot of health, you tend to use all of your free time trying to work for material things and sort of in the hustle and bustle of life. But there are very few times that you'll find health and free time combined. That's a blessing that some of us are able to have right now, which is that we're able to really pause, take some time to ourselves and reflect and reconnect. And I think that the social connection that's being formed, the vulnerability, we are best as human beings when we're most vulnerable. That's when we're most willing to admit some of our shortcomings, some of our oversights, some of our heedlessness towards other elements of the human family and other places of the world that have already been suffering in some of the ways that we're suffering right now. And so when we're vulnerable, that's when we're most reflective. And when we're most reflective, that's when we're able to most frequently connect. And so rarely with hardship comes ease. In the midst of this hardship, I think that there's some beautiful connections that are going to be formed, even with our communities, us being physically apart, forcing us to be more intentional about connecting with one another, checking on our elderly, thinking in a creative way, an innovative way about service initiatives. I think that'll make us stronger as a community when it's all said and done. So within this hardship, there's ease in some way if we look carefully enough. And it's not just light at the end of the tunnel, it's light in the corner of the tunnels that we're not paying attention to.
I got it. I'm getting the symbols. Me, I think. Hi, everyone. Those were beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's delightful to see all of these new faces. I was thinking, Reverend Jen, when you were speaking, that we're not singing hymns, but we are singing quite a lot of show tunes in our house. And I had not spiritually made the connection, but now I will. Thank you very much. So when this started and really began to unfold, the part of the Torah, the part of the Jewish Tanakh, the Jewish Bible that came to my mind was a book that was written after the destruction of the first temple. So the first temple in Jerusalem stood and was destroyed in 586 before the Common Era. And some people who had been sent into exile out of Jerusalem after the temple was destroyed collected a book of 5 poems called the Book of Lamentations. And in Hebrew, the name of the Book of Lamentations is Eicha, which just means how. How could this happen? How could we have been so unaware? How could we have been so fragile? It doesn't ask why. That's not the name of the book. The name of the book is How. And it starts, alas, lonely sits the city once thronged with people. And as a New Yorker, that was the line for me. Just like, I love my city. I'm from here, I live here, and I look out on the streets and I see a city once thronged with people and the streets are empty. And I think there was so much wisdom in writing a book, writing these poems about how bad it is, and not having to solve it and not having to say, it will, oh, don't worry, oh, keep working, or just keep yourself busy and things will get better. The book is simply a book of poetry about how hard it is to be a human being in the midst of tragedy. And then the people who canonized the Jewish Bible decided to keep it in because they knew that in the future, people who were struggling would need the words of the lonely city and the people in it. And just to know that it's okay to just sit in the how, to sit in the mourning, to sit in the grieving, to not understand, and to know that your ancestors have done that before you. So that's the not rosy picture I'm sitting with right now, is those beautiful poets and the people who decided that it's worthwhile to not solve the problem, but to just honor it.
Thank you, Rabbi Luria. And to all three of you, I'm wondering about, so I have a two-part question as my next question. One is a religious literacy thing, which is if each of you would be willing to explain respectively the holidays in your tradition that are coming up. The other part of that question being, how are you engaging your congregation during this time of isolation? And what are you hearing from your respective communities? So it's actually a three-parter, and I'm sorry for that. But I think they're all combined, and I think that they're the questions we're all grappling with, and so it would be useful and relevant for us to hear from you. So number one, if you could just talk about, Ramadan, Passover, and Easter respectively a little bit, explain that, and then what have the last 3 weeks been like vis-a-vis engaging your congregation, and what are you hearing from your communities? And maybe we can go in reverse order this time. Okay.
Okay, cool. So Passover is, probably most of you are familiar with Passover, but I'll just say it's in the book of Exodus in the Bible. And it's the story from constriction to freedom. And the word Egypt, from where we were slaves, the word Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. And the core word within the word Mitzrayim means narrowness, tsar. And so we understand that we read the story of our journey from narrowness to expansiveness every year. We recognize that there is a biblical narrowness to expansiveness, and we also recognize, we are taught that we were slaves and now we are free. In other words, it's not just a historical story, but it's also embodied in ourselves every year when we tell the story and we live the Passover experience, to think about how we are experiencing narrowness and how we are experiencing expansiveness. Is that enough for Passover? Do you want more? I could do 2 hours on this, so okay, won't do that. All right. So how are we engaging our community? So I have to say, in the weirdest way, I had the blessing and the curse of having mono for starting in the beginning of February. So for the last 2 months, I've been a lot out of commission, more out of commission than I've ever been since I had my last kiddo. And what it helped me recognize was that the community needs to be cared for, and it might not be me that's doing the caring. And so how do I build systems of care, small communities of care in which I am not holding everything? And that is definitely my theology and philosophy, and not always the way I act in the world. But this, having mono before having the virus, meant that I had to live into this belief and try to create ways for my community to care for each other in very concrete ways. So the name of our community is Beloved because I believe if you never walk through our doors, you should know how we feel about you and how God feels about you. And so we try to make cute puns on the word beloved. So we created what is called Beloved Branches. And beloved branches mean that we have a tree, and the branches of the tree are drinking from the same sap and root system as the tree that we are all a part of, but they are going out on their own a little bit and trying to create their own little ecosystem of buds and leaves and flowers. So we have 9 lay people who I train to be volunteer facilitators, and they gather for 4 to 6 people every week in just a Zoom conversation. And I created this idea that if we're going to be trees, if we're going to be branches, then we should have a sun practice. The sun practice is unfolding ourselves and checking in and being vulnerable, like was said already. The water practice is being nourished by our tradition, and so the facilitator shares some words from the tradition. And then the soil practice is asking people, what do you need? What are your physical needs right now? And do you need? And people are sharing all kinds of things. So I guess that goes to the next question you had, which is, what are people sharing? Yeah. I mean, I think whatever our people are sharing are what we're all, I mean, I think it's a human experience. There's something, like you said earlier, really beautiful about how connected it is to just being a human being and having the need for recognizing our interconnectedness, being part of a bigger story, being scared, being lonely, even when you're with other people, grieving, fearing for our own physical safety and the physical safety of our people we love. And some of our people are not well. Obviously, some of our people are sick and some of our people are well. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of, for a general, I would say there's a general level in our community, at least, of anxiety. And that has been just severely heightened. Fear of what is not known in all the ways. And that is, I'm seeing that in the faces of my beloveds on Zoom, and I'm seeing it, we have a meditation practice once a week that we do, I'm seeing it then. And yeah, so that's been my experience of just knowing that the needs are really, really great. And how can I, as the spiritual leader who has 3 kids, has been sick twice over the last 2 months, open my hands and say, how can this community really support each other right now? And me not being the center of all of that weaving.
That's a profound reflection. I think that's really hard to do, especially for faith leaders who are used to, shouldering the responsibility and burden. Sheikh Omar, can I move to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ramadan is, I think what makes it a little bit more unique. Obviously it's individually very tasking. It involves the Muslim community in every way. I'd written an article for CNN, not this past year, the year before, about why 80% of Muslims fast in America. 80% of Muslims fast Ramadan, but only 39% pray. And one of the reasons for that, that's according to the Pew statistics, one of the reasons for that is that prayer is a very lonely ritual. Ramadan is a very community-oriented ritual. So even though it's difficult and tasking, but everyone's sort of fasting together, coming together in mosque to break bread, to pray together, that's a very important element to it. On top of also the the idea of active identity versus passive identity. Passive identity is when you don't do something. Active identity is when you do something. And so passive identity, typically those rituals are easier for the community to do. Excuse me. And so one of the things that Ramadan involves is not just fasting, but a whole lot of community. And so it's 1 month out of the year, but to give everyone some perspective, for that 1 month, the mosque is as crowded as it would be for the weekly Friday prayer every single night, if not more crowded. And it involves much more than the prayer. It involves the food, it involves the community, it involves the service initiatives. It brings everyone together. So what's happening without Ramadan for the individual now is that they have to practice Ramadan alone, alone as in with family if they have family, but if you're talking about those that don't have family, those that don't, converts that, are new to the faith, that really need that structure, this is going to be a very unique Ramadan for them. There's also the month of charity, the fact that this is the month in which people typically give the highest amount of charity within the Muslim community, and this is the month that all of our charitable institutions rely on to get them through the year. So it doesn't just affect the individual and the family and the community, it's affecting the institutions too, because all of these, and I run a nonprofit, so all of our institutions were looking to Ramadan to raise the money that's necessary to get them through the year. And so the tragic part of this is that a lot of these institutions are probably not going to make it, including some of the mosques. And so when we need these institutions most to step up and to serve the community in various ways, spiritually, financially, emotionally, we're going to lose some of these institutions. They're going to have staff cuts and they're going to have to worry about themselves. So it affects us at the individual, family, community, and institutional level, since the whole year within the Muslim community really revolves around Ramadan. With that being said, I think the conversation in the community is shifting in accordance with the severity of these circumstances. And so the first conversation was, how can you close the mosques? How, because it's so unprecedented. So how are we going to close our mosques? And on the leadership side, we were the subject of a lot of outrage for taking those steps to close the mosques, to suspend our Friday services so that we don't obviously contribute to the problem, but instead are actively contributing to the solution. That evolves into, I think, where you're worried about Friday prayer, where now you're worried about the funeral prayer, especially in some of the more harder hit areas. The thought that we can't gather around our loved ones as they're passing away and do the janazas, the funeral prayers, the way that we're used to doing them, and then surround the bereaved, the family, the way that we're used to, is devastating. And so now it sort of has shifted into that. And so it went from Friday prayer to funeral prayers to the third one, which I think is, I think maybe on a religious side, we're underestimating a bit. And I say on the religious side, which is that more people are concerned about their finances than they are their health. Like if I'm talking to average community members, they're less concerned about catching the coronavirus. They're more concerned about losing their jobs and what that's going to mean for them. And people that were living check to check, even, this sort of downgrades, someone that was barely making it to not making it, and someone that wasn't making it already to being extremely vulnerable. And so we really have to speak to that financial apprehension, the looming Great Depression part two that's upon us as well. That's not to say that we prioritize financial well-being over the safety of everyone and everyone's health. That's to say that we actually use, I think, the moments where people are actually losing their lives to put the financial burden or the financial hardship that people are going through in perspective, and then try to think of some unique ways to come together as a community, just as we're coming together to, to check up on people and to adjust our sermons and bring in new innovative programming. We need to think of innovative solutions that we can, uplift the most vulnerable in our community, and actually put in some models that will help people get through this. And, I think that the last thing on this, just really quickly, and I'll allude to it, is service. Faith communities need to see this moment as a moment to teach America about the importance of faith. And you don't teach them the importance of faith through your Zoom calls and through your sermons. We need to be taking the lead on service initiatives. I think I'm a Hurricane Katrina survivor, and I'm from New Orleans, and I saw the most beautiful bond of the faith community. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, people of all faiths coming together to not just bond together, but to really take their faith to the rest of the community. Now, obviously, the distancing makes this difficult. We definitely need to apply good standards of hygiene and make sure that we're not contributing to the spread. But I think that we need to really implement some service initiatives that are to the benefit of everyone. And this idea that the food banks are run out of volunteers, and that these service initiatives don't have, that the food banks are maxed out on volunteers, and these service initiatives don't need any more volunteers, is absolutely false. I've been to these places in North Texas. They are in dire need of volunteers. And so I think we should be trying to organize our communities towards not just uplifting their own, but uplifting others. And that's central to who we are as faith communities, is that we push back on the insular, and we instead lead the way in harmonizing and uplifting others, and in the process uplifting ourselves.
Jen, can I move on to you?
Yeah, sure. So in the Christian tradition, we are approaching the end of the season of Lent, which is the 40 days in preparation, spiritual preparation for Holy Week and ultimately Easter. So Holy Week, which begins this Sunday with Palm Sunday, marks both the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem in preparation for what will ultimately be his death and crucifixion, which to me is a political question. Like I could go on all day about politicizing the crucifixion of Christ and what it says about empire and what we can learn from that in this moment, but I digress. Ultimately, the resurrection of Christ. So Easter Sunday, which is the holiest moment in our Christian liturgical calendar. And as I reflect upon Easter and Holy Week in particular, as we prepare for it, starting on Sunday, a couple of things come to mind to me, which also, to answer Zinat's other questions, I think relate to community. First is that a lot of our attention during Holy Week is oriented towards the question of resurrection, about bringing death coming out of new life. But we often forget that before the resurrection on Easter Sunday, we have Good Friday, which is the moment of Christ's death. And then we have Holy Saturday, which is this moment of absolute silence. So the altars are stripped, right? God is literally dead for that day. And one of the things that Scripture teaches us, that in the midst of this death moment, in particular the women who were at the foot of the cross after the disciples bounced, the women who stood at the foot of the cross, bore witness to Christ's death. And the next day, they go about the work, preparing the body for burial. They go about the work. And I think that there is something to be learned there about this season for us, that even in the midst of darkness, even in a moment where God is dead by all intrinsic means, what does it mean for us to go about our work, even if it's in unconventional ways, to care for community and being the work, living the work of community? So I'd offer that. For me, what that's looked like in my local church community, which is predominantly elders, we are an aging congregation, has been figuring out ways to attend to, in particular, those who are sick and shut in this season. And that looks, it looks like using, it feels so counterintuitive as a millennial to use my phone for things other than texting and email. But using it actually as a phone to call people has been revolutionary for me over the past several weeks, as I've, along with other members of my ministerial staff, have actually just picked up the phone and called people to check in and see what their needs are. And that has been a deep expression of community. The other gift, I think, that I've been learning in this season has been, even as we have moved to, my congregation's older, so I don't know how comfortable they feel with video chatting right now, but even, telechurch or tele-Bible study on the phone has been this unexpected gift around accessibility. So many members of our congregation are homebound and who desperately want to participate in community, but can't actually physically make it to the building of the church all the time. And so what this moment has done has really invited people to participate fully in the way that everyone else is in this season. And so, you know, we normally have about 8 people at Bible study. We've had upwards of 20 joining us in this time, right? We normally maybe worship 100 people at church, but streaming on Facebook Live and having folks call in, we've seen, you know, upwards of 200, 300 people participate. And so even in the midst of the darkness, I see this spark of resurrection just around the corner and a reimagining of what life on the other end of this can look like that is more inclusive, even of those folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate fully. The last thing I might offer is, you know, one of the great gifts, I think, of communities of faith in the season, that I think is also true of our creative and artistic communities, is that we attempt to give voice to the unnameable and make sense out of that which is unutterable. We attempt to project and see a future that has not been seen before. And so one of my encouragements to all of us in this season is that we shouldn't forget dreaming and imagining in this season, because, you know, the kingdom of God has not yet come upon us. This vision of beloved community in which all are honored and recognized in the beauty and particularity of their own human existence has not fully manifested in the world. And yet, each of our traditions have something to say about that. And now I think is the time and the moment for us to begin reimagining what does it look like for the US truly to be a multi-faith, multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy in which everyone sees themselves as a person that belongs, that their community belongs. Because I'm scared that if we don't take a verbal and vocal place in defining that right now, other folks who might define our country by fear and by opposition and polarization might win. So that would be my offering.